am very excited to be here today. I'm always excited to announce the number of transfer students we have at UNCG, and it has now surpassed the number of students starting with us as freshmen by a long shot. We now have 360 students in our BK licensure and non-licensure, and I believe it's 206 of them are transfer students. So the majority of our students are transfer students, and they're online students as well. So it's very exciting, and we have had a wonderful experience with transfer students. And I would say our faculty at UNCG don't even attempt to differentiate between transfer students and our native students who start as freshmen. The only indicator that we truly have is if they're online, they're typically the transfer students, but we have a lot of transfer students that also come and are in our face-to-face program. So we don't think about them much in that way anymore. We don't ever talk about the transfer program. We talk about online versus face-to-face now. So it's really changed over the years. Well, Erin and I are here today to really talk about, at least this is the title we were given, is supporting and preparing early childhood students for transfer. Then we'll see what really happens here. But we want to talk about setting the stage, and I think we both think of setting the stage in a couple of different ways. One is that preparation of our students, and I think that's very important, of course, to help with the whole transfer process. But I think also just to provide a little bit of context for why this continues to be so important. And I know that most of you, Erin and I talked about like preaching to the choir, and here we are doing it again. But really, I think we get new information all the time that helps us make the argument about articulation agreements, not articulation agreements, high quality articulation agreements. And so one thing that I'd like to share, as the incoming president of NAUIC, is really our strategic plan. And I'll be very honest with you, the reason that I was willing to run for president-elect of NAUIC was because of this part of our strategic plan. And it doesn't actually say in the strategic plan the significance of articulation, but what it talks about is the profession. And in that statement about the profession, the goal is that the early childhood education profession exemplifies excellence and is recognized as vital and performing a critical role in society. Again, maybe not a surprise to you, but those are very strong words coming from NAUIC. And as far as I'm concerned, they're new words coming from NAUIC. So always the emphasis has been on high quality early care and education programs. That's how I've always thought about NAUIC. And that I really wanted my professional organization to focus more on the teachers in the classroom, the individuals who are making those programs, high quality care and education programs. And so when I saw this new strategic direction before it was officially released, because they thought if you're going to run for office and be interviewed to run for office and all those things, they had to share the plan. I'm like, okay, I'll come and be interviewed, because it not only talks about that role in a general sense of a profession, but there are desired results indicated. And it's not surprising that the first one is that the preparation and development, as all of us know, in 2- and 4-year programs, is aligned with the NAUIC standards and delivered in innovative ways. And I think we are all, in terms of our roles, committed to that. But that we have skills, knowledge, and competencies. And again, I don't think that's anything that any of us would struggle with. We know that's critical to our roles in community colleges and in 4-year institutions. Now, the third one was where I thought, this is a little different for NAUIC, and something that I totally believe in and have committed in many ways, actually these last 2 points, my career to, that the early childhood professionals are diverse, they are effective educators and leaders, and these last two lines, within a compensation and recognition system that supports their excellence. And as far as I'm concerned, we are so not there. I feel pretty good about the first two, at least in North Carolina. I don't feel good about the third one, and I think it's something that I expect, you know, in my years with NAYC, for us to take some bold action with regard to. So I hope we get to do that. The last one gets big, bold print about the profession, because this is where they talk about articulation, and they talk about seamless progression for early care and educational professionals to advance their education, professional learning, and careers. And this is where it becomes about better articulation agreement, when we start talking about seamless progression for early childhood professionals. And you know, at this point in time, I can't tell you specifically what NAYC plans on doing about this, but I plan on pushing my way in to any discussions that happen about this, because, and I've said for a whole lot of years around the state, and I think I've been working on articulation. Gosh, Erin, were you born yet?
just a year or
just
so.
Barely, just a year or 2 years old. But the whole time I've been in North Carolina, and then 10 years before that when I was a professor in Illinois, it's always been something I thought, it just doesn't make any sense to me that we're not doing a better job of transferring credits from 2-year to 4-year institutions. And so I think it's something that NAYC is going to take on, and really in a very major way. And so I look forward to kind of keeping you guys up to date on what's happening. You know, I am, this is a national office, but my affiliate and my state are North Carolina, and so anytime I can give folks a heads up on this, I'm going to do it. So, and working with all of you too.
And if I can add something to that too. I think this bullet also is a lot about why we're here too. I think we're specifically talking about the 2-year to 4-year, but the seamless preparation in North Carolina is starting in high school, and that's what we're here talking about, is not only that 2 to 4-year, but that high school to community college progression. And I think we're trying to make that more seamless and more uniform. And so I can see this, you know, from the beginning on up.
And it just shouldn't be a question anymore. And you know, I think I've said that I won't retire until we have this solved in North Carolina, that we have high quality articulation agreements. I know, why did I say that? Between 2- and 4-year programs in particular, which has been my emphasis. No, I wasn't satisfied with UNCG. So we have more students than we've ever had before, but that doesn't give students the choices that they deserve, and you know, the options that should be available to them. So we're still, I mean, Erin and I are still plugging away along with Kay Hamlin, and we'll talk some about that, and many people in this room, to try to make those agreements. Ours is a statewide agreement, and I want to see not just these bilateral agreements, but you know, the agreements that are statewide. And it's a struggle, you know, and we've been working on it so many years, and now faculty have turned over. And so now you're starting with a whole new group of faculty at the 4-year schools trying to make this happen. So it's not only that, you know, the NAYC, I think, is focusing on the profession and on seamless transfer of credit, but the IOM report, I think, also was an eye-opener for many of us. And that's the Institute of Medicine, and I know most of you in this room are intimately aware of what the IOM report had to say. But I think that, you know, what we have here is factors in quality professional practice. And we all know that one of the takeaway messages from the IOM report was really about the importance of a 4-year degree. And in my mind, the way it reads, it's a 4-year degree regardless of setting. It's not a 4-year degree only in pre-K programs that are part of public schools. It doesn't say that. It says that young children are deserving of a teacher with 4 years of education, 4 years of college, regardless of setting. And I think I think the power of this was really not that it's a new statement, because many of us have made that statement for a lot of years, but that's from the Institute of Medicine, where we go, really? You know, if the Institute of Medicine gets it, you know, come on, we should be able to move this forward. This graphic really talks about, you know, what is the outcome there, child outcomes. And what's cool about this is it talks about science up here, you know? So we're using science. That'll impress folks. You know, we always knew it was a good idea without science. But now with science, we have a graphic that really demonstrates the importance of high quality professional practice based on professional learning supports. That means we need to have high quality education for our teachers of young children. We have to be doing the right things, you know, in-service training, obviously, but also pre-service. And sometimes in the early childhood field, we just mix those things together, in-service and pre-service, and, you know, sometimes we don't know which comes first, and they vary based on the individual, of course. So I think this graphic, it tells us a lot of things and how all of that professional learning supports relates and is connected by, you know, things like compensation, which we have down here. Again, competencies, but also it focuses also competencies of leaders and administrators, well-being of the practitioner, which means it's not enough just for us to be teaching the right thing, but when they get out there in programs, they need to be supported in those environments. And, you know, again, the knowledge and competencies of the practitioner. And then we really get into quality individual and collective professional, the practices which relate to the child outcomes. And so to me, that presents kind of the big picture of why we need to be doing what we're doing with regard to articulation agreements. It's part of the bigger picture of professional development in our field. So and of course, I mean, this is also from the IOM report, but it's that emphasis on improving professional practice, and that's going to come with an advanced degree. And I have to mention, it has to be that we're also considering other workforce issues like compensation and the support that teachers are receiving in their work environments. But also recommendation number 4 of Chapter 8, which Aaron and I are the leaders of Chapter 8 in North Carolina for the IOM report. But there has to be this interdisciplinary foundation in higher education for child development. And what I think is interesting about that is that in North Carolina, I think our BK licensing standards, which I know you guys have used to really kind of support changes in the 2-year programs, really are interdisciplinary. And it's hard to imagine with the standards that we have for BK in North Carolina, doing it without interdisciplinary involvement. And I know many of the programs, not all of the programs in North Carolina, have courses from a variety of departments. I mean, we have kinesiology, we have social work, we have nursing, I'm sure I'm forgetting a whole bunch in our interdisciplinary birth through kindergarten program at UNCG. And it's, again, it makes no sense for us to recreate those courses when they're available to us throughout our UNCG campus. And so I think that's something as we build, that we have to keep that in mind, how important it is when you're talking about a child's development, that we're really looking at things in a really interdisciplinary way. I had to include just the latest study. And you know what? That's wrong. It's not 2014, it's 2015. It just came out. It's one of those studies that took, Jennifer knows this. Jennifer, well, a long time back, was a master's doctoral student working with me at UNCG, and it's very, and Wassop also is a graduate of UNCG, and so is Andy. There's lots of folks in the room that I know from classes as well. So, so they know how long it takes to get a study published, and so we had this in the works for many years, but this year it was finally released in Early Childhood Research Quarterly. But once again, we found, and we find this in like every study that we do, that guess what? The more education, the better teachers perform. And this time we had a few other measures that we looked at. People are always looking at the ECERS. We looked at the ECERS-E, which is much more curriculum focused. We look at the class emotional support and classroom organization. We have a little scale that we developed at UNCG that right there is called the C5, because there are 5 words in it that all begin with C, but I can't remember them at the moment, because I just call it the happy child. It's the happy child scale. And so it's very cool because, you know, we finally have something that really says that, you know, when teachers have more education, they have happier children. Duh. We all know that, but, you know, we haven't had a very good measure of that. And so, again, just more data that says keeping teachers moving forward in terms of their education actually has amazing results in terms of all of these measures, and then our happy child measure as well. I wish I could remember the 5 C's. Okay, but the last 3 are child care classrooms. Competence, and then there's another C. Comfort, competence, comfort and competence in child care classrooms. I knew I could do it. The other point here from the study was really interesting, is that teacher education was negatively related to experience. And what that means is that our most educated teachers are the teachers who are newer to the field. So we really are seeing, you know, our teachers in North Carolina get more education. Those new folks are the ones that who have gotten those 2-year degrees and 4-year degrees. And we know that from what I know you all heard Sue do her workforce data this morning, and, you know, talking about, I think it's near 50% of the teachers in North Carolina now have either a 2-year or a 4-year degree. That's just amazing. 56? Is it 56? I mean, come on, you guys, think about where we were. You know, even 15 years ago. I mean, we had. Yeah, 20 years ago. It's just amazing. Yeah.
It was under 10% in 1990.
Is that what it was? 10% in 1990. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And so it's not surprising that the newer teachers in the field are those teachers with more education. So just kind of getting more into, Erin is standing here next to me. She's my support mechanism here, but you can come closer. But I think, you know, Erin and I wanted to talk more specifically. That's kind of some background information. But one of the things that we know, and this is always, in my experience with articulation and working with 4-year schools, and this is throughout the country. This just keeps happening. I mean, there were many, many years that you know, other states were asking me to come and talk about articulation, and then, you know, it's kind of died down for a while. And so I was kind of thinking that maybe we had fixed this problem nationally, and then it started up again. Here we are. So I went to Wisconsin in June, and on Friday I go to Ohio because they're saying the same things to me that they were saying 15 years ago, that we still can't get the cooperation of the 4-year schools to really improve these articulation agreements. And it's like, this is really disheartening. See, I was going to do it again. But, you know, I think what they come up with for 4-year faculty, and I speak as a 4-year faculty member, is that, well, if students really want to transfer, then why don't they just take the you know, general ed option, where all the courses will transfer. There are 44 hours, 45 hours, 44 hours of them will transfer. This first bullet is really the key. And this is from an interesting article by Apple in 2004, and she's from Indiana and has done a lot of thinking on articulation. But, you know, this student intentionality, I mean, we know this, that they don't start off at the community college thinking that they're going to move forward to a four-year degree. They just, I mean, there might be some, and maybe many of those go toward the AA degree with, you know, and get their general ed requirements and transfer. Maybe they do that. But many of them just don't think of themselves as successful learners. They definitely don't think of themselves as test takers. I could pretty much vouch for the majority of them on that one. I'm not good at tests, therefore I'm not taking the SATs, ACTs, whatever it is. And I don't have to if I go to a community college. But that intentionality changes over time. And we've looked at it as a static, and it's not. Why would we think that? Because life is not like that for us. Like, how many of you thought you would actually be here today doing what you're doing? And okay, you're rolling your eyes like, oh God, how did I do this? But, you know, if you'd told me when I was community college age that I would ever be a professor, I mean, come on. You know, I mean, just, one story, Erin. But when I was an undergraduate, you know, I was one of those, you know, the student. I sat in the back of the room always, never in the front of the room. I never talked in class. It didn't even matter the size of the class. I always was quiet and in the back. And so after, you know, I graduated and then went on, you know, for a master's and PhD. I met up with one of my instructors from when I was a sophomore in college, and she goes, oh my gosh, from having you in class, I never thought you would make it this far. And it was like, I think you're trying to be nice, but it's really not coming out that way, you know? But it truly was that there didn't look like a lot of potential back there, you know, but, you know, things change. No, I know, and it's, yeah. No. But it's, you know, it's funny, we make those judgments and it's like, wait a minute, you know, there's great potential in the back. You just have no idea. But my intentionality, it changed, you know, it just things, and it changed from being a teacher, you know, it was because I went out there and thought, oh my gosh, I have no clue about these children. They're just little mysteries to me. I must need more education. And, you know, that just snowballed. And that's what happens. It's what can happen to your students, because so many of them are teaching full-time while they're taking classes, and they just keep raising questions about practice and about children's development. So it's like that, how many times do students decide on a career path? The other thing about sort of this intentionality is, you know, so often, you know, because four-year faculty are saying this about, well, just have them take an AA degree, you know, that's not going to work, because they're just not, first of all, that's not going to get them engaged in terms of, you know, what they really want to know about. But, you know, it's also very hard to have kind of a reverse degree, meaning that you get all of your practical and courses and methods courses at the community college, and then you go to the four-year program and you take all general ed. That's not going to work either, you know, it just doesn't, because you're actually too far away from the nitty-gritty pieces by the time you graduate and then go to teach. So somehow, I still think we need to focus on this, and Erin and I have worked on this some when we helped to think about changing the community college two-year AAS degree program so that there are those gen ed options in the elective area. That was kind of our best thinking at the moment of how to kind of keep the gen ed all along, you know, the way to a degree. Now, with maybe more or less success, but you know, I know you guys, you were talking about advising earlier, but I think having these checkpoints or completion points along the way, and I know you do a better job of advising than we do at the four-year schools, but you know, sometimes I know that your advising loads are too large to be able to actually have these conversations about, like, what are you thinking now? Do you think now you might want to go into a four-year degree? You know, like, how often should we really ask these questions? And I think Apple really raises a good point on that one. Like, do we need to think about more formal checkpoints? all along the way. Yes, oh, good, Erin. This one's still mine. We do, I think, need to still think about this gen ed as a barrier. You know, the course numbering, unfortunately, I'm not hearing it as much. I'm still hearing it. It's more from other states rather than North Carolina now about this course numbering thing. You can't possibly transfer in a 200 level course for a 400 level course. Actually, you can. If the competencies are similar enough, you absolutely can. That's harder for some four-year schools to hear than for others. The teacher licensure continues to be a barrier in our state and other states as well. And what I mean by this, when we were negotiating, I won't name schools, but with one school, a four-year school in North Carolina, it was not actually the major requirements in early childhood. It was these core requirements that all students who are going for a teaching license have to take. So they will have, many schools will have institution of education and require, if you're a music education student, so you know, and for those of you who have a teaching license, you know that this is true. And there usually are about 4 or 5 of those courses, and it's called the Teachers Academy at UNCG. The Teachers Academy will not substitute for, I mean, that you may not waive those, you may not look at them cross-eyed, they are sacred. And that's killing articulation. It's really because it's like 4 or 5 courses that you just can't get around. That's not true at UNCG. I think actually we've done away pretty much with our core. People thought that was a little dated to have core courses that were required of all students. So that all just made articulation a lot easier when you're not trying to play those games. That's not true at other schools, and we know them, that just can't get past that, like they call it Teachers Academy, or sometimes it's just teacher education. The praxis, we had gotten rid of the praxis at UNCG, and it's back with a vengeance. It's odd, but times change, and some of those are political times that change. And what's happened with the praxis is it's required again. We also have a more stringent GPA requirement. Our students in teacher education now are required to have a 3.0 instead of a 2.75. That is statewide. This is coming. I don't know if all the four-year institutions have actually implemented that yet, but as of this fall. We have found, we're working on at UNCG a little bit of a way around that so that the faculty have some control. If we think a student is deserving despite not having that 3.0, where we think that we have agreement with the Teachers Academy that we can let them in. But these are new CAPE requirements, which used to be NCAPE. So the other thing is they are upping the scores required, like SATs and ACTs, of teacher education students. So those are killers too. But they shouldn't affect transfer students necessarily. But it's all about greater rigor for teacher education. But I would argue, and what we did successfully argue at UNCG for a while, is that, why is it like they demonstrate competency in math by getting A's and B's in the required math courses, but they can't pass the praxis math? I don't know. To me, what means more is that you got an A or B in the required math courses, because that's over a semester. That's really practical knowledge, demonstrating that knowledge. And it doesn't make sense to me that the pressure-packed experience of a test would mean more than an ongoing course in this. But that was for a limited time at UNCG, and then when political, and they changed while I was gone at the Division of Child Development. I came back and found the praxis. It's like, oh, I just can't stand that. So I think that's, something else we need to think about. But we're still struggling with this statewide versus bilateral agreements. We have a few, UNCG. Oh, so maybe one.
Some in the queue.
Yeah, some in the queue. We think we have Charlotte coming through with a statewide agreement, and we may have Wilmington, but they're not quite as many hours as we would like them to be yet. But they would be. Looks like they could be statewide. Statewide, I think, is still the way to go. There's just too many 4-year and 2-year programs. If you look at the numbers of bilateral agreements that would be required, I think people it's cumbersome. It is just too hard to deal with, which is why we've been pushing for that. And we also are pushing for accepting the program not course by course. We know that programs are composed of courses. We're aware of that. But rather than looking at it in that way of course by course, you're always going to end up with kind of a worse agreement by doing course by course instead of a program transfer. The other worry, and I think it's a worry/barrier, is this surcharge at 4-year schools for when you accumulate more than 140 hours, we assess at UNCG a surcharge. It's a lot. Who said that? Okay, that's it. I knew that. It is. So yeah, it's an additional. So yeah, instead of 100%, you're paying 150%. I knew it was either 20 or 50, and I couldn't remember which, but it's 50. So that's a huge amount of money, and that means that students are basically penalized when you transfer a bunch of courses in from the community college as elective hours. So you might give them 64 hours of credit, but a bunch of those are electives and they still have to take 80 hours. So what that adds up to is 140 some hours right there, and they're paying the surcharge at 150%. So we can't do that. We can't have a bunch of transfer courses coming in as elective hours, because that surcharge then clicks in a lot sooner for them. And it's costly. It's just costly. So, and I don't think Teach likes to pay for that surcharge, do they? Yeah. So I'm going to pass the baton to Erin, and I'll prop you up.
All right, sounds good. So, Deb went through the barriers, and so now we're going to just kind of briefly discuss some of the ways to maybe help with some of the barriers. And she's mentioned a few of them as she's gone through, but we wanted to kind of break it up into things that we can do in higher ed, but also things that students can do to advocate for themselves and help themselves along the way. And of course, we talked about this from the beginning of today, and I know some of you were here yesterday too, so relationships between both at the high school and community college level, but the community college to the 4-year programs is just critical, and it is very time consuming and very challenging to sometimes get those relationships built and keep them built when people leave and turnover happens, and that's really hard, but it's a really critical component to establishing an agreement and keeping those agreements going and helping students know those agreements well so that they can transfer.
And just, one of the things that we talked about at our the Professional Development Institute work group on higher education, which Erin and I chair that committee, but there was a lot of talk about this relationship issue, and that how is it that we can have 2- and 4-year faculty spend more time together. And one of the suggestions I remember is having some kind of in-service education provided for 2- and 4-year faculty together. It probably would be online because we'll get better turnout, but it was a great idea.
Right, just like this, this group, absolutely, yeah. Having these kinds of meetings where multiple people come together that may or may not know what's going on, but that's good. That's how people learn what's going on, and everybody's able to get on the same page. So yes, that did come out, and that group, and which we'll talk about in a minute a little bit more, that group actually will get to kind of propose directions for where we want to head in terms of higher ed, and kind of put forth an action plan. And so that is one of the things on the table, is potentially, is that something that we want to really invest our time in and really push forward, because our committee, multiple people on the group felt that was really important, and it has not happened consistently through the years. So something to think about. Deb already mentioned the statewide instead of bilateral, and for those of you who are not really sure what in the world we're talking about, what we're talking about is when you have a community college that just articulates with one four-year school, like Johnston articulates with UNC Greensboro, and that's one little agreement that we have between them, for example, versus UNC Greensboro articulating with all 58 community colleges, not just Johnston, and there'd be some consistency across all 58. So we're aiming for that four-year school articulating with all 58 community colleges and having some agreements. Now, each of those agreements, the unfortunate thing for us community college folks and the high school folks that are trying to encourage everyone to move on up the ladder is that they're still going to look different because every four-year school is a bit different. Their numbering, their courses, the way that they design their programs. So there's not going to be one magic. We've tried. So many of us in this room have tried so hard to make a magic number, a magic agreement that will work for all, but it's just not going to happen. But if we could at least get most of our four-year colleges on board that have a really good agreement and offer it to everyone, that's a good.
That's our definition of statewide.
That's our definition.
Yeah.
That's right. That's where we're headed. The next bullet would be kind of getting around that praxis barrier that Deb was talking about, is that sometimes, there are licensure programs at the four-year colleges, and then there are also non-licensure tracks for birth to kindergarten and early childhood. And so sometimes you can kind of get around this praxis issue by taking the non-licensure track, graduating, and coming back to get your license. And I'll let Deb tell a little bit
that's
about
right,
that.
Erin, you've got it. And
Yeah.
the thing about that is, for whatever reason in higher education, when you come back and add on the license, you're not required to pass the praxis because you have already demonstrated through completing a degree that you're capable in all those. Now, don't try to make sense of this, because based on what I just said before, you would think they wouldn't allow that. But you can, and this is what we encourage our students to do. Now, you're still going to have that grade point average, but most of our students, by the time they complete the four-year degree, and they've gone through student teaching, which they usually do well in, and all those upper-level methods courses, they usually have that grade point average. They just can't pass the praxis, and so, but they come back, they don't have to take the praxis, and they add on the license, and they're fine. It just has taken them probably an extra semester is all.
So a couple other things that we hit a lot in transferring, and we talked a little bit about this earlier with the high school to community college, but it's also true from community college on, is this whole idea of challenging math content can be very challenging for our workforce. Reading and writing content can be very challenging for our workforce. So trying to think of ways like integrating, and we talked about some of that this morning, ways to integrate some of that early childhood content in, or other strategies. Sue mentioned a few more new ones this morning, to try to kind of get past those barriers and help our students on into their early childhood coursework. And then aligning competencies. So we've done a lot of work with that, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but again, not looking at course by course, but looking at competencies, which is often when you come back to that program versus course to course transfer. If you look at the program competencies, they match up really well sometimes, but if you go course by course, you're going to have 3 courses for one, and it just gets kind of messy, kind of like what we talked about with the DPI courses this morning. So it's more challenging sometimes to do course by course versus competencies. So strategies for students. So here's some things we can try to encourage our students to do to help with articulation. And the very first one, Deb mentioned already that a lot of our students, and this is true from high school on up, they don't necessarily think about going on to get their 4-year degree. Or their master's degree or whatever. They come in needing a credential. That's pretty much, I mean, a lot of our students, that's how they come to us. They need their credential. Their boss sent them there. They heard I still hear, I need my credentials 1 and 2. Do y'all still hear that? I hear that all the time, and it's like I get on my soapbox and I talk about, okay, 15 years ago, those courses were, so you still hear that. It still permeates in our field, so it's interesting, but they come in wanting their credentials. credential, or credentials 1 and 2, or that early childhood class I have to take for the state. I mean, that's what we hear. So they just aren't thinking about transferring, and unfortunately that can really get them they're behind the 8 ball at that point. Because as soon as a student knows, encourage them, ask them every time you see them, are you still planning to just get your credential, or just get your certificate, or just get your associate degree? Are you wanting to transfer on to get your 4-year degree? As much as we can do that, and encourage students to talk to us about that, because the faster we know, the better off that they're going to be in terms of us steering them to the right courses. And to start taking those general education courses. They don't like to take those a lot. Like Deb said, they want to get into the meat of early childhood courses. They don't want to take English and psych and all that, but it's important if they're going to transfer to try. I have a lot of students. Our program actually has a choice of math or science. You know, in an AAS degree, by our state curriculum standard, we can have a choice. They don't have to take a math and a science. So we have a choice. Some programs don't, but ours does. They can take a math, and they can take bio or chemistry as their choices in that math, natural science elective. And the very first time you see a student, if they have a bunch of developmental maths, they are like jumping because they could take a science and get out of that math class, right, that they're so fearful of. But we always say, let's talk about this, because if you're planning to transfer, you need to understand that you're going to have to take a math. You're going to have to take a math at some point. So why don't we go ahead and talk about how to help you get through this math class, because it's probably better at that community college level to go ahead and try to get through that than it may be when they move on. So it's important to have those kinds of conversations. We also tell students, and this could be, next two kind of go together, shop around when you're going to transfer. How many of you all have multiple agreements at your community college for students to transfer? So several of us have that. And I don't know about you all, we do as well, and they are not the same. They are not the same. There are some agreements that are better than others, that some schools will take more coursework than other schools. So we actually talk to the students. I mean, I'm very honest about that with them. And we tell them, do your homework. Talk with someone at that 4-year school and find out what's going to transfer, because it may be that they really want to be whatever, right, a pirate or a buccaneer, whatever
Spartan,
Spartan, they want to be a Spartan, right?
She keeps saying pirate, and I keep saying Spartan. Nobody knows UNCG or Spartans.
I know. I'm sorry, Spartan. So maybe you really want to be something else, and you need to go be that, right? If you really want to be a wolf pack, then you need to go be a wolf pack, right? But if you really want to look at what is going on with your program and how many courses are transferred, you need to look around, because not every college is going to take your courses in the same way or in the same number of hours. Again, some of them will take 64 hours, but they take most of them as electives, which doesn't do them as good, really, as if they took 55 as actual college classes, that toward the major. So you really have to kind of shop around and think through that. And Deb, actually, when we were talking about this, she said the next one, which I think is great. Encourage them to talk to the schools that they don't go to and tell them why, because that will help make these agreements stronger. When 4-year schools continue to hear, I'm not going over there because you don't take half my classes, that might actually begin to make some momentum and some movement. So we need to encourage students to try to do that. Another thing is we need to encourage students to talk to us about what kind of modality they want. Some students are great at online. A lot of them think online is the only way they can get their degree, and for some that could be true. But some students are not online students. They're very challenged with online. Reading and writing intensive courses are usually, online, and so those can be very challenging for those students. So are you a face-to-face person? Are you an online person? Do you need a quicker, some programs are faster at the 4-year school, which can be great, get you through, get you done, keeps you moving, but for some students it's too much. It's too intense when they're trying to work and go to school. So talking about, what type of program, evening, weekend, online, intensive, faster paced, etc. Cost Again, students have to think about cost, and we talked about that this morning with Sue's presentation. You know, how do we help students get through, whether it's a public school or a private school, but cost is definitely a factor that's challenging for articulation, especially when they move from the community college to the four-year. And their career goal, like we said, not everyone, the license is our kind of pie in the sky for North Carolina, right? The BK license. That's probably our best bet if we could get everybody to that level. But, you know, if you work in Head Start, you don't have to have the license. They want you to get that four-year degree, right? But you don't have to necessarily have the license. So if you work in NC pre-K classroom, you have to have the license, you know. So what is your career goal and where do you want to go and what, you know, what are your options? We have students who come in and they say, well, I want to get my credential. And so we start talking to them and okay, so what do you want to do, or what classroom are you wanting to work in, you know, what setting? And well, I want to be an NC pre-K teacher. Well, let's talk about that, because that's not just the credential. That's a four-year degree plus a teaching license, you know, and you're here, this is what you say you want, but where you want to work and what you want to do is up here, and do you understand what it's going to take to get there? Let's talk about that. So sometimes they don't even know, and again, I think it goes back to what we said earlier this morning. Our career ladder, we've got to get that out there, that career and education ladder, we've got to get that out there so that students know where they're headed. So Sue actually stole the thunder this morning with this slide, but this is just a reminder about advising, because advising is so critical for transfer students, even really in many ways more so than our current students. But as you heard this morning, so many of our students, most of 91% from this study reported that they feel like advising is important. But as you keep going down in terms of helping identify the courses, most of us do that. And help students say that we do. But when you get into setting academic goals and when you get into talking about supports outside of school, it just gets further and further down the line. And those things are really important, especially when it comes to transfer students, to try to get into that knowledge base of who these students really are and what they have to support them as they transfer. So, course selection is important, but not the sole purpose of advising. Setting long-term goals, you know, is really important, because again, they don't always have those goals. So talking through that with them. What is the most important thing? Where are you headed? What is your path to get to your goal? And regular advising, literally every time we talk to students, whether they're at the high school level or the community college level or at the four-year schools, we really need to ask them, are you still on the same trajectory? Because my experience with students, and I don't know about your all's, that changes very often. Like from spring semester to fall semester, they've changed. They've changed where they work, they've changed their goal. They don't know if they want to be in the field anymore. Now they want to get their master's degree. I mean, it's all over the map, literally for 6 months, you know. And so constantly checking back in with them every time we have that opportunity to make sure that path we've set is still appropriate for them. Another thing, and this is really true for transfer students, it's true for all, but transfer students, is students need a home-based college. We have a lot of students in early childhood that they flip from college to college, and you guys might see this too in the high school level. They're not sure where they want to go, and so they'll take a class here and they'll take a class there. We've got to try to help students have a home base because transferring gets more complicated when you're transferring from all these different programs. Even graduating gets complicated when you're pulling in all these classes from all these different colleges. In fact, a college can't even issue a diploma or a degree if you haven't had a minimum, and this varies by college, but SAC says a minimum of 25% of that program has to be taken at that college for you to award something to them. So it gets really challenging when we have these people taking things all over the map. So we have to try to help them to kind of pick a plan.
Well, interdisciplinary is important, but it has to come together somewhere.
Together. Yeah. That's exactly right. So having that plan and tracking the milestones, getting to know the student, their strengths, their learning styles. So the goal of articulation that Deb and I have been working on, as well as others in the room, is that we really want to see these articulation agreements bloom with the majority of our EDU core courses and the Gen Ed that we require, which is 15, or we try to add in a little extra, add it up a little bit more, 18, 21 would be even better, to transfer. and and to transfer for credit in that program, not elective credit, for actual course credit, so that by the end they have no more than about 70 hours remaining, which means that they can go in and complete that potentially in just a couple more years if they're full-time students, which we know that's not always true. But that would be kind of the goal that we're trying to work towards. So the current efforts that we're doing to try to help work on articulation, for those of you who don't know, there is and if you want to get involved, please do, North Carolina Articulation Oversight Committee. This committee started a couple years ago thanks to a big national grant. Actually, North Carolina was one of the states that participated, and that is kind of where these individual agreements are being worked on that Deb was mentioning with like Charlotte and Wilmington and others, to try to develop agreements, enhance agreements. We had some agreements on the books that were so old that they weren't even really viable anymore. So trying to get those back out, dust them off, figure out if they're still applicable and viable, hopefully enhance them and make them better than they were even 5-10 years ago, and continue that effort to get more of those statewide agreements. So that's the project. Kay Hamlin has been, some of you know Kay, has been working on that project, and I'm sure we will be continuing. That is to be continued. There's lots of efforts going on there. And that project actually partnered with Growing Greatness, and so Kathy has been sitting on the articulation leadership team. Lisa is on that team as well. So Growing Greatness has kind of taken we've partnered together to try to get some of the tasks done that the Articulation Oversight Committee has been working towards. And of course, Growing Greatness has been a big effort towards this whole pathway idea, high school to community college to 4-year. And so EDU course description revisions have been done and will be moved forward for approval. Student learning outcome revisions have been done and moving forward for approval. We tried to align standards with those student learning outcomes. And when I say that, I'm talking about we're looking at the BK standards, we're looking at DEC recommendations, we're looking at professional teaching standards. I think we had like 5 or 6, didn't we? Sets, Helen and Sharon and so many in here. It's like mind-blowing. It makes you want to just crawl somewhere in a hole because it's so hard. It's such hard work, but it's also really important work, because what we're trying to show is that the community college course descriptions and student learning outcomes align with our BK 4-year programs. And that's the important thing. We want to show that alignment. So that's all been done as part of Growing Greatness and working with the articulation group. Embedding foundations, formative assessment, and cultural, linguistic, and ability diversity has also been sort of a focus of Growing Greatness, which again goes quite well with our 4-year friends over here. So the Spartans, right? Among others.
You got it. Yeah, you're not going to forget that now.
And then Deb mentioned the higher education work group, which is actually part of the North Carolina Institute for Child Development Professionals. It's a work group that has been started based on the IOM report that Sue shared this morning. And that focus really is to look at improving the quality and accessibility of education for the workforce. And this is the group where the whole idea of trying to meet together, doing this kind of thing more often with high school and community college and 4-year faculty, so that we all get more on the same page. We have shared professional goals and learning together and things like that. So we're using the Institute of Medicine report as the framework for that. And we've had one official meeting. We're scheduling our second meeting, which is, again, to try to come up with what should be our goals for higher ed in North Carolina, community college and 4-year. Where do we want to go next, and what's going to help with all of these kinds of issues?
For a long time, I taught a class that was really probably considered a junior level class. And many students, and there was a research paper requirement in there. And they would say to me that it's the first time in their entire lives that they've had to write a true research paper. And they're juniors in college, which means that they didn't write it in high school. They didn't write it at where, their first 2 years, whether it was at UNCG or somewhere else, that's a long time to escape being able to kind of pull your ideas together coherently into a paper. And so, it's kind of alarming. On the other hand, I know what happens, at UNCG, our cuts have now become so dramatic from the legislature that we have doubled the size of some of our sections. And, I can tell you one instructor after another has cut that writing requirement because, and I'm sure that's true at the community colleges as well, you can't grade 150
It's called
papers.
survival.
It is called survival. So I just don't, that's like going in the wrong direction, you know?
But it happens.
It's so frustrating. And I felt like we were pretty rigorous on those writing requirements at UNCG, and now I feel like we're not because of how many, we've just, what happened in our department was we were told you can hire no adjuncts. You have to, and you might have been told the same thing, but to take away adjuncts from our BK program, you might as well cut off our left arms because we're totally dependent on adjuncts to get it done. And I don't even know how we've done it these last years. Other than I know we deleted a course requirement. That was one way to do it, but also we increased the size of sections, and that's just not workable in especially methods courses. So, I mean, that's not necessarily an answer to your question about how to help them prepare, except the best way to become a better writer is to write. And graduate students have a huge new cohort of graduate students, and they're all working full-time in the early childhood field. And we just made a requirement in the first course they had this summer to go to the Writing Center. Let the Writing Center take a look at it. I will be the first to say that not everybody needed it, but probably 2/3 of the class needed assistance with writing, and this is the graduate level. So, our Writing Center now, these are all online students. They will now they will work with you online, which is so much better than taking in a draft, having them. So we've come a long way on that. But if there's writing, even if there's just little things that you think are problematic, I think it's really helpful to use those resources at the community college before they ever get to us. Even if you think they're kind of okay, they're probably not going to be okay in terms of what our expectations are at the next level. I don't know, Erin.
Yeah, the writing and the is not just a transfer issue. I mean, even the students coming, I think I've heard you say that even the traditional students going into the four-year schools, it's an issue. So it's a challenge for everybody. But I agree. I think I just try to get them to write and learn how to format papers and cite sources correctly and not plagiarize, and
that's not plagiarize. That would be like a really good start.
Okay, good.